In today's class, like I said, I'm going to we're going to, of course, talk about the background of ancient China today. I'll talk about the geography of China first a little bit. I'll get into like the early dynasties of China, like the Shang dynasty, the Zhou. I'll get into them. I'll talk about also like the rise of the different Chinese philosophies, Confucianism, Daoism, I think, legalism, I think, was another one that was kind of popular in ancient China. So that's pretty much what I'm going to be lecturing about today. And then, of course, on next week, Monday, I'll kind of wrap up on China and talk about some of the later dynasties. I'll talk about the Great Wall of China, how it gets constructed, in China, which is, real famous, which had different, building constructions of it, that were over time. So I should have like a new slide, of course, you may have seen, of course, on ancient China, which is right there. So I'm going to I'll kind of go into and talk about, some of the background of China first. I think we've already talked about this already, the fact that China is the third oldest of the River Valley civilizations. Remember, it was Mesopotamia's oldest, followed by India, then China's third, and then you've got, of course, Egypt, the last one of the four overall. You can see China's, of course, circa 4,000. That's just like, I think when they start like farming, they think 7,000 years ago is when they think farming started in ancient China overall. And I mentioned before how China started in the Yellow River Valley in the eastern part of China, eastern central part of China. It's an area that's actually called the North China Plain. Is where China actually got started. It's actually the birthplace of China's civilizations, China's agricultural production from a long time ago when they grew rice and other crops overall. I think I do have some different maps of China I can kind of share with you a little bit, which is kind of a modern map of ancient China, which you're kind of looking at. I can kind of blow it up for you, but you can see like the eastern part of China. It's about where China got started, more or less. You see where it says Wang Ho? That's the actual Chinese name for the Yellow River. Now, the Wang Ho, you can see the Yangtze River, which is right below that also as well. Both those two rivers, by the way, Yellow and Yangtze, are the two longest rivers in Asia. Yangtze being the longest, which I think is around 4,000 miles. And then the Yellow River, the Wang Ho, is about 3,400 miles long. 3,395 is what it says in length right there. North China Plain, where's that about? It's about kind of, it's kind of hard to describe where it is, but it's kind of in this area right here. It's kind of like between Beijing and Shanghai, maybe about the area of where it is. And that's pretty much where a lot of early farming began, like in ancient China a long time ago. It's also where like a lot of the first humans kind of lived in ancient China a long time ago. Like I may have mentioned about Peking man that was found like, I think in the early 1900s, like a Homo erectus fossil. And I think he was like 1 million years old or whatever it was. And he was living kind of in this area. So in the Yellow River Valley, which is right there. Now I'll get more into like China. China itself, it kind of develops culturally due to its isolated geography. It's heavily isolated. Their geography. It's they've got all these different like mountains and deserts that block it to the west. And then you got to the east, you've got all these different seas. Like, you got the Yellow Sea, the East China Sea. You got the Pacific Ocean and so on. So all those different, I guess barriers or whatever kind of, help to, create a unique culture in ancient China. There's also a lot of deserts, like Gobi Desert to its north between Mongolia and China. It's hard to get through there until people had horses and so on, I guess. Taklamakan Desert more toward the west, getting close to like Tibet. And Tibet's got a lot of different mountains you can see. Kunlun Mountains, the Tibetan highland and plateau there. I guess it's close to like where the Himalayas. You got the Himalayas below that, blocking people also as well. Also, China's agriculture, like I told you, how China started like 7,000 years ago. They started farming like a long time ago. Those are originally some of the crops that they grew like a long time ago. This is during the Neolithic age in ancient China. Millet, which is a type of grain that people grow all over the world, like in more arid or drier conditions, which I guess would be grown more, maybe, I guess, in the north or whatever. And then, of course, rice. Rice became the big crop. I think, especially by the time of the Tang Dynasty, I know rice became pretty much the main crop that they would pretty much use in ancient China. And you can see those are all kinds of crops I got below that China's known for. Tea. They're the biggest producer of tea, like in the world, like more than India, I believe. Soybeans is big. You probably heard tofu and stuff like that. They make soybeans out of things like that. Cotton. They do produce a lot of cotton, like that in India and Egypt. They have a lot of cotton. Wheat, believe it or not, yeah, they do have a lot of wheat. Potatoes also as well. So those are the kind of crops, of course, that are constantly grown in China and still grown today, more or less. Let me also talk about the Yellow River a little bit. It's, of course, has a unique name that they often call it. I'll kind of blow that up for you real quick here. And yeah, the Yellow River gets its name from this brownish sediment that's in the water. They actually have a name for it, which is called less, either like a sediment or soil. They think that washes down from like the mountains in China. And it has calcium carbonate in it, which I think has kind of got a yellowish color to it. And so hence that's basically why the river has its color. It's kind of a yellowish brownish color is what it really is. Yeah, it's a very muddy river that you can see right there, flowing from like highlands of Tibet, basically from west to east. And I think it drains into the, I guess it goes like the Yellow Sea and the East China Sea and all that on the eastern side of China. You see on the right, it has a nickname, which is very famous. It's often called China's Sorrow, which is a nickname that they started using in the 19th century. They called it that because of the fact that the river has been prone to drowning a lot of people. It says thousands. It's way more than that. It's more like millions. It's drowned millions of people. And two worst floods they ever had in China's history were the 1887 flood on the Yellow, which killed like somewhere between 1 to 2 million people. That sounds bad, doesn't it? No. The one in 1931 was worse. 1931 flood, that was like even worse. That was considered the worst natural disaster in human history. Killed somewhere between 2 to 4 million people. They don't really know. Drowned so many people, 3 million, I guess, average. But yeah, it's like one of the worst natural catastrophes in history. And so that's something that, China's known for. I don't know if it floods as much as it used to because they now have flood control. They've dammed it, if you know all that, if you know that. And so it's not as big of a problem as it used to be. The other thing about China I did want to mention too is that China is also known, the Chinese are very famous for different inventions, like from a long time ago. You can kind of see some of them right there. Gunpowder, compass, paper, printing. Those are some of the things that they're kind of known for. I'll put more on the screen for you. But those are some of the big ones. Paper, printing technology. Like you think of like, Johann Gutenberg developing the printing press a long time ago, but they believe the Chinese were the first to actually print books, like on bamboo and paper. Like develop, paper and all that, wood paper, etc. Ink, of course, because calligraphy to write the Chinese language. Development of compass was pretty important. Marco Polo later brought the compass to what is Europe, which is from originally from China. Crossbow was developed in the Iron Age in China. gunpowder, which they made different weapons out of. So they had, and of course, fireworks, which everybody's heard of before. Silk, for the silkworm is something they're known for too. Iron plow, also as well, and also porcelain. Different kinds of pottery. The Chinese are kind of known for. You can see all kinds of things in there. They may have ice cream, possibly, maybe dominoes, possibly early paper money. They had some kind of water wheel, looks like it, and a few other wheelbarrow, maybe possibly as well. So all kinds of things that the Chinese have invented from a long time ago. So yeah, China's, is a great civilization that goes back thousands of years, like some of these other civilizations, that's been around. All right, now I'm going to get into next. Now I'm going to talk about some of the different dynasties, of course, in what is China's history overall. China is very famous for its many dynasties, like numerous dynasties, kind of like the Egyptians had like over 30 dynasties. They had somewhere close to around that same amount. The dynasties go like a long time. I believe that China's dynasties is the longest in history. Like, I don't know if that's quite exactly right, but it's close to 3,600 years or more that China's had dynasties, which they've either ruled either by kings for a long time, and then later mostly emperors that they would have. And you can see that they, I guess the reign of their emperors kind of goes from like maybe back to like the 17th century or so, maybe 17th or 16th centuries. It kind of varies on the time for it. And then it goes up to 1912. The last Chinese emperor stepped down in 1912, which is 109 years ago. So they had emperors going back that far, more or less. A lot of their dynasties are based on a kind of a rise and fall of dynasties, which they've had in history. And the Chinese had this political theory they had, which was called Mandate of Heaven, or Tian Ming, which means in Chinese, heaven's will. And the belief was that the gods in heaven dictated who would be the king or who would be the dynasty. And the Chinese believed that if the rulers weren't just and they didn't follow the will of the people, they would be overthrown and replaced by God, by either another king or another dynasty. And it's kind of similar to the Europe's, like modern Europe's idea, which was divine right of kings, which was a political social theory that was real popular up to like the Age of Enlightenment and all that in Europe. And so that's basically, what they called it, Mandate of Heaven. It's kind of like their version of that in China. I'll add this too as well. The Chinese dynasties also referred to their like dynasties as being called Tian Chao, which meant celestial heaven, or excuse me, celestial or heavenly dynasty. That's actually what they called it, their dynasties and all that, over like a long period of time. Which I think up to like, I want to say maybe the Zhou dynasty, they start using that term more or less. Now I'll kind of get into the different dynasties. I'll at least talk about two major dynasties that they had in China. They have the Shang, sometimes pronounced Shang dynasty. They have the Shang, and I'll get to what they call the Zhou dynasty also as well. So you see that one on the right. It was around for like 500 years or so. It's either start 16th or 17th centuries, depending on what chronology you look at, more or less. I'll blow that up, and I'll show you, of course, the Shang. You can see started in northern China. They were, of course, one of the first powerful kingdoms of ancient China that you really see that comes in at that point. And they were a dynasty that developed in the eastern part of the Yellow River Basin. They had a capital that was called Yin. You can see Yin, which is based close to where the Yellow River Basin is and all that. And it's actually based, or at least the ruins of Yin were based where the modern Chinese city of Anyang is today, which has a population of about 5 million people. So Yin was considered, and Anyang was considered to be one of the first traditional capitals of China, going back a long time ago. China's had like a numerous capitals, which I'll kind of mention about later. They had, but it was their first capital. And the dynasty's known for a lot of things you can see there. They developed like some of the first written records and language in ancient China. That's probably their main thing they're mostly known for. They had also other technology like bronze technology they were known for. And the first thing I did want to talk about, which the Shang were very famous for in their history, was, you may have heard about the oracle bones. That's well known that they've discovered in modern times. And the oracle bones were these bones or like turtle shells that they use to keep records in China. In fact, the development of early Chinese language started from there, which they called it later Old Chinese or Archaic Chinese, although I think they called the original Chinese language Oracle Bone Script. That's actually what they called it. So that's how they kept records. And however, the oracle bones were supposedly, if you know about this, they were used for like divination, which is prophecy, where they would write stuff on them. And I think what they would do is they would hold it over a fire, and as it burned, they would try to tell the future with it. And the people that would, I guess, be involved with this, it might be like a king or nobility, or it might even be like certain kinds of Chinese priests that were involved in whatever kind of religion and rituals that their culture had. And I'll put it on the screen, but most of them would submit questions to like their gods, basically asking them about the future. So it could be about the weather, could be about crops, being planted or whatever. Could be about battles coming up. They're going to fight a battle, and should we fight it or are we going to win? That kind of thing. Also talks about the fortunes of family members and all that. So there's all kinds of topics that are, of course, with the oracle bones. You can also see this picture here of another oracle bones. Turtle shells are quite common. They use to write them on. It's probably more famous, which is right there. But they think that's where the early beginning of like Chinese like calligraphy kind of comes in, which will eventually develop into like the old Chinese language, which will be a little later. They were known for all kinds of different beliefs. The Shang, of course, first of all, they were a Bronze Age culture, which I kind of mentioned about before. The Shang were the ones that introduced like the war chariot, the China as far as they know. So they had bronze technology. They had ceramic pottery. They were one of the first to develop that in the beginning. I think I've got a picture of like some Shang pottery, which is right here, which they made out of different materials. I think the one on the right is probably bronze. The one on the left is made out of, I believe that's jade, which is a type of stone. So they make pottery out of stone. And all kinds of metal work also as well. What do they use to write on it? I'm not really sure about that, but I'm sure like ink was the common thing they use. Like Devante's asked me a question about what they use to write on the bones. I think it's probably ink, most likely. I don't know what kind of tool they use, but some kind of, probably like the Egyptians, some kind of like a stylus or something like that, likely similar to that. So likely like ink and stuff like that was probably used to write on them. So yeah, there's examples of pottery that you're looking at right there. That was a good question, Devante. Now, what else too about the Shang? They had religion. I forgot about that also as well. I'll talk about that. But first of all, the kings themselves were mostly hereditary. As far as they know, they were absolutist, as type of monarchs. So there was no like democracy in ancient China like a long time ago. They did have a religion, which was often, connected with the whole divination ceremonies. They would write on these oracle bones. And they did believe in like a supreme God, which usually the term for supreme God was actually, some say D, but it was really called Shang, which meant supreme God or supreme deity is what it meant. And a lot of their gods were often associated with basically like natural stuff, like the sun, the moon, the rain, and things like that in the natural world, more or less. And a lot of the worship of their gods, they did this because they thought if they, worship their gods, that it would bring successful things like crops, like good rain, and so on, a better life in general. They also, which you'll see later with a lot of these, like Chinese cultures, a lot of them practice what they call ancestor veneration, which is also prominent. You'll see that a lot with Confucianism, ancestor veneration. So anyway, kind of talking about like the Shang beliefs in their culture. And it's usually Shang T or Shang D. I think it's usually how they pronounce their main god that they actually worshipped, more or less. The Shang were around a long time. Like the first two dynasties were around like a long time, almost like I want to say 1,000 years or more overall. So I'm going to get into in next talk about another dynasty that comes in after the Shang, because they get conquered by that particular dynasty, which is they call it the Zhou. Some people say Zhou also as well. It's another way they say it, which they'll come in around the 12th century or so. This particular civilization, either 12th or 11th. There's kind of a debate about when it was that they conquered the Shang. But what happened? They think that the Zhou dynasty was some kind of dynasty which was like kind of seen as barbarians to the Shang, who lived to the west of the Shang dynasty, somewhere in like the western part or central part of the Yellow River Basin. And they came in, they eventually conquered the Shang state close to about the 12th or 11th century. It's kind of debate about when it was when they came in and took over. You can see they were around a long time. They were around like something like 800 years, something like that, or more, and 900 range. It's about how many it was. And the Zhou are important because this particular state is known for different things. They start really kind of centralizing the power around the king that you can see. They're also the ones that introduced iron technology to China. Like the Iron Age begins in ancient China. So you start seeing like the use of iron weapons, iron chariots. They got the iron plow, which is developed in China. Oxen, driven by oxen, of course. The crossbow was also a very famous weapon. Of course, you think of medieval Europe, right, using crossbows and up to like modern times. But the crossbow was something that was invented by the Chinese a long time ago. Zhou also developed the first like coins in Asia, like in China, like money and so on that you see. Then they think of the Zhou were the ones that developed the so-called mandate of heaven. That political theory they thought about how rulers come into power or dynasties. And they created the mandate of heaven to basically say that that's why they had taken the place of the Shang, because they had not lived up to the mandate of heaven's will, the just rulers or whatever, protecting the people and all that. So, and of course, you see like the idea of the way or the Tao, which of course will be part of Daoism, will kind of maybe starts back then, you think early Chinese philosophy, which I'll get into that, what that is a little later, but that's something that's also part of that time period as well. Oh, by the way, the Zhou were famous for creating a capital of China, which I think they say is traditionally viewed as one of the first of the four major capitals of China, which is Luoyang, I think was the original name that they called it, like in ancient times. And then today it's called Xingqiao, is the name in Henan province, of course. And it's in the eastern central part of the People's Republic of China today. It has a population of 10 million people living there. So it's a large sized city. But China has had traditionally 4 different capitals that they've had. Some of these you probably have heard of before. Of course, Beijing is the most famous capital of China today. It's the modern capital. It's also pronounced Peking, which is kind of located right above the Yellow River Basin, northern part of China today. But you see those other ones there too. Nanking or Nanjing has also been a capital here and there. Also, Xi'an, which is the modern name, has also been a capital, which in ancient times was called Chang'an. And then, of course, I mentioned Zhengzhou or Luoyang is, of course, being the other capital. So all those have been the traditional capitals of ancient China, which have changed over time, depending on, I guess, the dynasty that's in power, more or less. Oh, also about the Zhou, they were founded by this dynasty, a family of kings that was called the Ji family, which the Ji or Z may be pronounced that way too. I'm not sure. Ji family is a common name or surname you see in China today, but they're the ones that basically started the dynasty. And I think they're the ones that developed the whole mandate of heaven political theory that we talked about. Also, the Zhou is divided into 2 periods, which is true about it. It's got this first period called the Western Zhou, which kind of starts at the end of the Bronze Age. And they had a second period called the Eastern Zhou, which kind of comes into the beginning of the Iron Age that you have. I think they believe that what happened was that they got invaded or something in the West, and so they moved their capital from the central part of China to the eastern part of China, which I think is where Luoyang ends up later, more or less. That is something that they're kind of known for. And China actually would decline, though, during that period, that second period, so-called Eastern Zhou, that they have. Here's another slide, of course, on the Zhou dynasty. I'll kind of go into and I'll kind of talk about the period of the Zhou, and they're known for different things, famously for under the period of the, I believe it's the Western Zhou, the Western Zhou that they have originally. They have a period in Chinese history that's called the Chinese feudal period or Chinese feudal system that they have, which I think is called Fingjian, I think is the name of it. And it's a period where China goes through a period like medieval Europe, where they have this like system of like land and economics, where everything was controlled by a economic system of lords, vassals, peasants, and other people that were under it. And yeah, it often has been compared with like the medieval times in Europe. They kind of go through the same kind of thing, more or less. And the Feng-Jing system included a hierarchy where the kings were at the top, of course. Then below them were the nobility, like various lords. Then you had commoners that were below them, which were mostly peasants. But then you had other people that were also there, you see, which could include like 4 occupations, which were merchants, gentry, peasants, and laborers. Predominantly, but I think most are like kind of like a peasant or I guess like a serf kind of class. But you can see some of those are kind of like almost like a upper middle class or something like the merchants would be, or gentry. Gentry class would be like these educated scholar type peoples, that you might have, like Confucius would probably be in that group, which would be right there. The Chinese were known during this period for developing a type of land distribution system they had, which was called the well field system. You may have heard of this before. And it's where they basically divided the land up into different pieces between the peasants and the lords. Usually what they would do is they would divide a land up into 9 pieces. Like it looks like you draw like a tic-tac-toe symbol, basically, with a square around it. That would be basically what it would be. And there would be 9 fields. There would be 1 public field, which would be in the middle. And then they have 8 fields, which would be all around them. that they would have. And how it worked was that basically the peasants or whatever would work the land, like the public land, for the king as tribute to him, and all the other private lands they could basically do for themselves. So the crops for themselves and their families and all that. And that's how basically they shared the land between like the lords and the lower vassals, peasants, and all that. So it's kind of like a hierarchy of, from the top to the bottom, from the king on the bottom and all that. But they think that what happened later was that in the Chinese feudal period, they began to decline. You know about this from the Western, really the Western to I think it's under the Eastern Zhou, actually. The Eastern Zhou that they have comes in next that you have. And during that time, you have the so-called warring states period, which I probably won't talk about today, but China's going to break up eventually into this period where basically all these feudal states we talk about start fighting against each other down to about the 3rd century BC. And you can see they kind of break up into numerous warring states that fight each other. You can see the capital of Luoyang, which is right here, which is kind of what's left of the Zhou state. It's kind of starting to break up into all these different rival states that are all around it. Qian or Qian, which is over here to the west, of course, eventually becomes one of the most famous. That kind of evolves from that period. And they'll eventually come in and conquer the whole area of China here and form like the Chinese Empire, which will happen later. I'll get to that later, not today, but probably my second part lecture later. But you do notice, like in this picture, this map, that China starts also building like fortifications. This is like the early aspect of the so-called Great Wall of China starting to be built here. Originally, they were built to block each other, like in, I guess, the wars. And then also later it was used to block like barbarians and all that from coming in. Now, I want to move on. Of course, I want to talk about also, like Chinese philosophy as well. That's one thing that China's, very well known for in ancient China. And there's a period in China, China's got all these different periods I'll kind of talk about briefly, but in the Eastern Zhou period, there's a period that's called the Spring and Autumn period, which goes from about the 771 to about 476 BC. So from the 8th to about the 5th centuries, China goes through this period where they kind of have like the beginning of like Chinese philosophy starts. The warlord states start breaking up and fighting each other during that time, more or less. And the 100 schools of thought is the peak period of when Chinese philosophy takes off, which is they think started like the 6th century BC. It's about where it began, more or less. So you get all these different forms of Chinese philosophy you may have heard of that started. Confucianism, of course, the most famous that got started originally. Daoism or Taoism, they called it. Legalism also took off, which heavily influenced China politically, etc. School of Yin and Yang, you may have heard about that also as well, is also another thing that is also very famous that kind of started in ancient China, which is also associated with Daoism as well today. Let me go ahead and first talk about, of course, some of the different Chinese philosophies they have. Of course, one of the first, of course, is Confucianism. Confucianism is really not a religion. It's more like a philosophical system that was developed by the famous teacher and philosopher Confucius, who was also a politician who lived about 2,500 years ago. So he kind of lived around the same time, close to when Buddha was living. I talked about the other day. His philosophical system was a type of system where it was supposed to be based on the ideas of morals and ethical ideas, but also not just that, but the idea of the family, the idea of having perfect social order in Chinese society. These are ideas that Confucius basically pushed in ancient China And a lot of his ideas were not accepted early on. I think up to like maybe the Han Dynasty, they started maybe kind of starting to adopt it. I know, but for a long time he struggled to try to push these ideas in ancient China. His real name, by the way, is it's pronounced different ways, but Kung Fu Su or Kung Fu Si, I think is usually how they said his original name, which means Master Kong or Master Kung, basically is what they originally called him. But what happened was over time, Jesuits that went into China, like in modern times, like back in the like 16th century or so, they started calling him Confucius. They kind of slurred it, and that became basically the name he went by. So Confucius. I'll kind of go into and talk about some of the ideas of Confucianism that's well known today. One of the most famous is the so-called 5 Confucian relationships, which talk about the idea of family being the central focus of basically social harmony, basically the central part of society in China. It's still today like that in China, in a lot of Eastern cultures, more or less. It's often called the so-called 5 Confucian relationships. I think in Confucianism, they usually call it the so-called 5 bonds. So it's something he kind of popularized. And of course, the Chinese believe that they had these different relationships and they acted in a certain way with each other, like proper code of conduct. You know, you would basically have a more stable society in general. These are usually the 5 they list. I'll put on the screen, but usually ruler and subject is usually the first one. So the ruler should act a certain way with the subject and so on, you know, like citizens of the state, basically, and vice versa. Father to son is the second one, second bond they have. Husband to wife, the third one. Fourth one, elder brother to see the younger brother, also as well. And then fifth one is friend and friend. And a lot of times, you know, you can see there that the older person is usually, you know, given a lot of respect more than the younger person. Like the older brother is more respected than the younger brother because he's been around longer and all that. So, so that's something that the Confucianism popularized throughout, of course, ancient China, more or less. Also, the Chinese have something called filial piety, which you may have heard of as well, which is idea of virtue of respect towards elders. It could be like, you know, elders. It could be your parents. It could be your grandparents, great-grandparents, whatever. It could be your also your ancestors that are deceased, the dead. So it includes them as well. This is a big thing in, you know, parts of, you know, Asia, East Asia, China, India, Japan, Korea, whatever. All kinds of parts of Asia pretty much practice. See it also in Buddhism. It's big, and other types of, you know, philosophical systems, Daoism, Taoism, whatever, and so on. And of course, in the West, they kind of do that too a lot. You know, filial piety. It's something you see a lot too. Respect, you know, towards parents, the dead, also as well. Also in China, like in, I think you see it in Buddhism as well. There's respect towards like the dead, the veneration of the dead is also something that's important. Ancestor veneration, and so love, respect, you know, worship even towards their dead ancestors and all that. And the Chinese even see it as like Confucianism as like, you know, some of these deals where the dead are actually becoming one with God. They think like when they die, their souls go to heaven and they become one with God. And so they're kind of like almost like deified gods in a sense to them that have, you know, pretty much gone away. So those are some kind of ideas that, you know, Confucius kind of brought forth that kind of were popular later in in Asia and all that. Also, don't forget Confucius also introduced like ideas of good government. He believed that government should be dictated, like the people that run it should be based on merit, like, you know, just their success they've done in life, and not who they are related to, or, you know, because of patronage or et cetera, like a spoil system or something like that in American history or something like that. But also, they also thought that they should have civil service type testing should be used, where they should have testing, you know, to get the best people to work for the government, you know, most, I guess, intelligent or educated, that kind of thing. Confucius, over time, if you study, a lot of his philosophical teachings, if you know about this, were written down. I think they say by the Han Dynasty, pretty much the books or philosophy of Confucius was eventually written down in what became known as the Analects, or Analects of Confucius. Although it's gone through different versions, like over a long time, up to like medieval modern times today. And some of his sayings are very, very famous. If you know much about it, the most famous saying of Confucius is the so-called Golden Rule. I think most people have heard of that particular saying of Confucius. And I do have some other slides if you want to look at them, which are right here. But basically, Confucius, the belief was that, you know, treat others how you want to be treated. Is pretty much the main philosophy of what Confucius is talking about. Or I'll give you another version of it, which is do not impose on others what you do not wish for yourself. It's been often seen as like a version of it. Of course, Jesus said something like that. I think on the Sermon on the Mount, I think you get kind of a similar kind of, you know, saying like that as well. The Good Samaritan, that kind of thing. And so that's basically the kind of ideas that Confucius was trying to spread pretty much in Asia. Confucianism, by the way, spread all over the place. Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Taiwan, or other areas that spread from China as well. There are believed to be about 6 billion people today that practice Confucianism, more or less. And so it's not really a religion. I don't know if they really have have a God, you know, believe it or not. But it's more of a philosophical, you know, way of life, of living your life and so on. Now, they also have another type of Chinese philosophy that's well known, you may have heard of, called Daoism. You may have heard of that, Daoism. And Daoism came about the same time like when Confucius was around. And it's a type of rival philosophical system that emphasizes living in harmony with what they call the Tao or Tao, which means the way, which is kind of hard to explain what it is. But the Taoists believe in different things. They believe first in what they call the school of yin and yang. Yeah, yin and yang, which is this idea that there's this cosmic dualism or dualistic ideas in the natural world that you have, which you may have seen this before. Basically, these things are, by the way, keeping like forces balanced, like throughout the universe overall. So you might have positive versus negative, the sun versus the moon, female versus male, heaven versus earth, cold versus hot, light versus dark. That's just kind of examples I've got on the screen and all that. But those are just ideas that basically they say keep balance in the world, in the universe, and makes life better for everyone. And I have a definition of what the way. It's kind of hard to describe. Like if you look up a definition of what the way is, but the way is basically the natural order of the universe, whose character one's human intuition must discern in order to realize the potential for individual wisdom. They're talking about the ultimate reality of existence, like in the world and all that. And this was an idea that was brought up by this Chinese philosopher who lived about 2,500 years ago. He's around the time of like Confucius and Buddha, they think, which is Lao Tzu. They've heard of him. And Lao Tzu was famous for a book he wrote called The Way of Virtue. Tao Te Ching, of course, you see there, right there. It's a famous book he wrote. And this philosophical work is the basis of like Taoism or Daoism in Asia today overall. There's one more philosopher I will mention about who's also very famous as well. You've probably heard, everybody's heard of him, which is Sun Tzu. Yeah, Sun Tzu was around the same time period as the period of the 100 schools of thought in ancient China. Of course, he was a very famous military strategist. He was a Chinese general who lived about 2,500 years ago, roughly. And of course, Sun Tzu is the one that's famous for writing that book you probably heard of called The Art of War, which came up with these new kinds of ideas of military strategy and all that. And they think that that influenced basically a lot of different military strategists. It influenced like different generals in modern times and later times, modern, medieval, ancient times, I guess. And also they think it's weird, but they think Sun Tzu's book may have also influenced like modern business world. I don't know what it is about that, but the modern business world is kind of obsessed with Sun Tzu's the Art of War, which I don't know why, but it's kind of, I guess, because it's got a lot of different strategies that they can use, in business economics and things like that. So that's basically my my part one lecture this week, of course, on ancient China. Of course, I think the second lecture might be a little longer next week because I'll probably have more information, of course, about some of the other dynasties that's going to be coming up. Of course, I will be talking about the Great Wall of China, of course, in my next lecture next Monday, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about the Terracotta Army, which you can see that some of the statues of it, which are behind me right there. So I'll get into that. I'll talk about the Han Dynasty and some of the other dynasties. They have the Qin or Qin Dynasty, the Han Dynasty. I might even, for a few minutes, talk about the Tang Dynasty as well, which the Tang Dynasty was the peak dynasty of what they call the golden age of China that they have up to ancient times and all that. So before I go, of course, this don't forget, I did give you some reminders about the different assignments this week, which are due. I know Canvas quiz number 3 is due this week, so try to wrap that up. Vocab is not due till later. I think you still got a couple weeks on that one to get that one done. That one might be due, I want to say, probably on close to about mid-March or somewhere, I think it is when it's due, that one. But I did put up that new India quiz, which you should be able to start working on today if you want to get to that. And if you have any comments, questions, of course, about this lecture, let me know later on. I think Devontae had a question about the oracle bones and all that. Thanks for that question right there. And I'll see y'all later, of course, on next week, which I guess is Monday. What is that? Monday, the December, looks like Monday, March the 8th. But yeah, be working on that new ancient India quiz for next week overall. And I hope y'all have a good weekend coming up and all that. So I'll see y'all next week. Okay, so take care. Y'all take care.